of our book study, Meeting Life. So, as communicated earlier, today's topic is what is a religious mind? For those who may be joining us for the first time, there are some new people. Here are a couple of quick logistical notes. Professor Krishna will be summarizing today's topic, which may take about 40 minutes. Following that, we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we will move into the Q&A session. Due to a large number of participants, we kindly ask that you submit your questions using the group chat. Please wait until Professor Krishna has finished speaking before submitting your questions, because your questions may be answered in the speech itself. Today, Donna Feder will be coordinating the question and answer sessions. All participants, as already Donna mentioned, will be muted, and only those designated to speak will have to unmute themselves. Please note that the sessions will be recorded for future dissemination. With that, I invite Professor Krishna to begin.
I'm not able to see my own picture, so I hope you are able to see me.
Yes, we will.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
So, good day, everyone. Before we begin, I want to mention one thing. You would have noticed that we don't have a session over the weekend of 4th and 5th May. That's because the Krishnamurti Foundation of America is having its public gathering over that weekend. And there would be many talks online on Krishnamurti's teachings. And those who are interested should feel free to participate. So that's the reason we have skipped that week. But otherwise, every week or every weekend, we have a session. I hope all of you have been able to read the chapter on what is a religious mind. Like last week, where Krishnaji pointed out that we don't really know what love is because it's not what commonly goes with that word in society. A similar thing applies to the religious mind. What he calls the religious mind is very different from what society considers a religious mind. So we will look into it as to why he feels that the mind that society describes because of the institutionalized religions is not the true religious mind. He makes the point that the true religious mind inquires deeply into every problem in order to get to the root of it. Is not satisfied with going only halfway or coming upon a new idea or a new opinion. It wants to discern at the very root what is true and what is false. This quest for truth is the true meaning of a religious mind. Of course, it goes with love and compassion and non-violence, but those are byproducts of wisdom, which comes from self-knowledge, and self-knowledge requires this learning called of the inquiring mind. It's not an intellectual inquiry with analysis and logic and so on. You can use logic, you can use analysis to refine the question, but you can't use it because the truth is the unknown, and all logic is based on the known. So one has to be free from the known in order to come upon a silent mind, which is not chattering and therefore not distorting its perception. That's how it describes the religious mind. But our investigation should be, how does one come upon such a mind? Because we don't necessarily have such a mind. And in order to discover such a mind, he says, you must negate what is false. You must negate what is not religious. So that's what we will be investigating today. The investigation will be ours, not necessarily the same as what Krishnamurti has done. Because his teaching is that you must not just accept what he says, we must inquire into it and find out for ourselves whether what he is telling is true. It is only in that process that we can come upon deeper perceptions for ourselves, which transform our consciousness. And the true religious mind, its purpose is to transform consciousness and come upon virtue as ordered in consciousness. It's a learning process, not a achieving process. Not that you posit enlightenment as the goal and then use your will to come upon it, because the will is the essence of the ego. We said that last time. And the ego is the source of all illusion, all division, all disorder in consciousness. So we will go into that also as to what is the ego and how does that differ from the conditioning. We said last time how the conditioning results, and the ego also results as the child grows up in his home, in a particular culture, with certain values, and acquires the opinions and values which are there in the environment around him. All that particular conditioning is simply an accident of birth. He could just as well have been born somewhere else. He would have had a different condition. So conditioning is not the ultimate truth, neither yours nor mine. Because truth has to be the same for all observers all over the world, as also in science, so also in religion. So first of all, what is wrong with what the institutionalized religions have done? They are built around a great teacher who freed himself from the past and came upon a new perception and taught out of that perception. This is true of the Buddha, it is true of Jesus Christ, it's true of Socrates, and many others who have around whom religions have been built. And in Hinduism, there is not one person around whom it was built, but a whole scores of people, even with different beliefs and different, but they were regarded as wise people, saints, and the entire collection of that is called Hinduism. So there are religions based on one book, one teacher. There are other religions which are based on multiple teachers and multiple books. But Krishna says neither of these defines the religious mind. Essentially, an institutionalized religion came after the death of the teacher and tried to propagate the teaching, but could not propagate the wisdom of the teacher. And without the wisdom of the teacher, you can't be a true follower. So that's one thing which Krishnamurti pointed out, that following one of the religions or one of the wise men is a false notion. You can't follow the individual because you can't decide to live that way. For instance, Jesus Christ said, show your other cheek also, meaning if somebody is enmical, you don't hate him or become enmical. How do you eliminate the hatred in your heart for the enemy? And if you don't eliminate the hatred in your heart, can you just decide to show your other cheek also? Can you just decide to be non-violent? The hatred in your heart is already violence, even if it does not manifest outwardly in actions. So the purpose of religion, according to Krishnamurti, is to end the disorder in consciousness. And our consciousness is the consciousness of whole of humanity. The disorder arises in exactly the same way in all human beings, and therefore also in society, because society is just a manifestation of millions of relationships of such individuals. So he says, only the true religious mind can solve all our problems. Not just the intellectual mind, not the scientific mind, not the economic mind, and so on, all of which are limited, fragmented. They can achieve certain results, but they will not solve all our problems. And indeed, we can see that the problems our society and our lives are facing today have not disappeared despite all the scientific progress and despite all the religions and philosophies of the world. So the serious question is, how do we come upon this transformation of consciousness? And he points out that the disorder in our consciousness in the form of negative emotions like anger and jealousy and violence and hatred and so on arises out of illusions in the mind. Now, illusions means you are taking something to be true, which is not true in the sense it is not part of nature. Or you are giving too much importance to something which is not really so important in life. Both are illusions. And there are many such illusions which we acquire in our conditioning and which we take for granted as the truth and direct our lives accordingly because we are unaware that they are false. And that is why this inquiry called self-knowledge, which is to discern what is true and what is false in our conditioning, is essential part of the religious mind. Without that, you can't come upon the religious mind. To discover the religious mind, you have to begin with your own conditioning, examining it. There are things which are true, healthy, which don't produce any disorder. There's no need to get rid of them. But there are other things which produce all these negative emotions, create division in society, bring about violence, and so on, which we are seeing plentifully right now. So many wars going on in different parts of the world, and so on. Of course, we have created a United Nations to take care of it, but that they only deal with the symptom. They object to a great manifestation of this disorder, and they go there to ameliorate the symptoms. But they cannot eliminate the cause, and therefore the symptoms keep recurring. Wars keep recurring. And each war sows the seeds for the next war. Because the psychological warfare between communities, between countries, between human beings, between religious groups is continuous. And unless we resolve that and come upon a love that is universal, this will never end. And so Krishnamurti's teaching is that merely to deal with the symptom of each war and try to arrange a peace, which means the violence ends, but the hatred continues, is a temporary solution only at the level of manifestation, not at the level of consciousness. And so it doesn't go very deep. That's why one needs a religious mind which can go to the root of the problem and free itself of the illusion which creates that problem. Now, what are these illusions? When you start examining the illusions in your own mind, you will find that they are at various levels of consciousness. At the most superficial level, there are superstitions. They vary from culture to culture, but they create a lot of imaginary fear, which is not based on actuality or reality. It is purely imaginary. That can go away even with education, with scientific investigation or knowledge. But deeper than that, at a deeper level, are the cultural illusions, which includes all these religious beliefs with which one identifies. The notion that you need to compare yourself and compete with others and do better than others. The idea of success. The identification with ideology, which creates division. All that is cultural. The communist is divided from the capitalist. And there is a lot of fear and suspicion among them. So the love goes out of the window. And when you compete with others and you want to come on top, you are essentially treating your brother as a competitor or a rival and not as a brother. And we are trained into it through our education. So all along the childhood, we promote the ego, not knowing that the ego is the greatest source of disorder in our consciousness. We think that the ego is our friend, that it defends us, that it protects, that it enables us to be aggressive where it is necessary to be aggressive and fight for our rights and so on. So we have all kinds of explanations why we have to be violent. And therefore we want to sustain the ego. We don't want to drop it. You cannot drop it voluntarily anyway, because it's a deep-rooted psychological process going on within oneself. If we examine it, you will find that there is no ego in nature anywhere, but in our consciousness, we create it. The human consciousness is the only consciousness which has this problem of being egotistic and working out of self-interest. The ego is not the self. The self has its structure, like we have explained last time. A child growing up in a particular country, particular culture, particular family, develops attachment for all this and feels safe within its own home and environment and calls it mine, my religion, my house, my parents, my family, and so on. And therefore, there is this identification with the me and the mind, in which the mind thinks it is secure. But that's an illusion, because it also is divided from the other person who is doing a similar thing with his environment and his ego. And therefore, your self-interest clashes with his self-interest, and therefore there is hatred and also war. As between individuals, so also between nations and between religious groups also. Krishna ji has explained all that in great detail. Now, if the ego is not a part of nature, how does it arise within us? It arises from our own approach to life, to the activity. You can do the same work egoistically with self-interest, and you can do the same work non-egoistically. So the ego is not in the work. Krishna said the religious mind can do any work. It will change the way that work is done. Because right now that work is done egoistically. But the same work can be done non-egoistically. You'll change the manner in which it is done. I have a slide which shows how dangerous the ego is. Of course, one must not accept just these equations. I'm fond of equations because I'm physics background. But that's just a way of showing that the real problem is not with what life has given us, but by this attachment to the me and the mind, which creates the ego. And if we perceive the danger of that, we can free ourselves by it. So all the watching Learning about oneself has this purpose of sensing the danger of the ego. Once you sense the danger of the ego, that kind of approach will cease. Because nature has put an intelligence, which is not the intelligence of our thoughts. It is nature's intelligence which does not permit us to embrace danger. So when you embrace danger, namely the ego, it is because of ignorance, because you are not aware of the danger. So if I might share my screen to show you my equations. It's entitled The Role of the Ego. In the columns on the left, I have kept all the capacities which our human consciousness is endowed with. That these capacities have been given to us by nature. By themselves, none of them is useless or objectionable. But when you attach the ego to it, which means when you operate that with self-interest, you see what it becomes on the right-hand side. Love plus ego becomes attachment and possessiveness. Wish, which is a very natural thing. I wish to go for a walk. I wish to have some food, and so on. I wish to make friends. Add the ego to it, and it turns into desire and addiction. Power, which is the ability to do things, very useful, necessary. Add the ego to it, and it turns into domination and exploitation of others. Sexuality, something nature has endowed us with. Add the ego to it, and it becomes lust, pornography, and rape. Violence comes into it. The ego is essentially a violent phenomenon. Friendship plus self-interest becomes support and dependence. Humility, which is a virtue. Add the ego to it, and it becomes a feeling of inferiority and being survived. Talent, which is so necessary for operating efficiently in the world. Add the ego to it, and it turns into pride, vanity, a feeling of superiority. Excellence, which is a natural wish to do as well as one can in whatever activity one is engaging in. Add the ego to it, and it turns into competition and rivalry. Groups. We have to work cooperatively in groups with others, whether they are groups in a school or groups in a hospital or in the office, factory, and so on. Add the ego to it, and it creates division, nationalism, and so on. Thinking, thought, add the ego to it, and it turns into worry, fear, and anxiety. Pleasure, such a natural thing. You eat some food, it gives you pleasure. You meet a friend, it gives you pleasure. You go for a walk, it gives you pleasure. Add the ego to it, and it turns into habit, addiction, boredom. And need, we all have needs, but add the ego to it, and it becomes greed and covetousness. So you will see that the problem is not in any of those capacities in the first column on the left. But as soon as you add ego to it, which is our own approach or utilization of these capacities, it turns into something evil on the right-hand side. Now, this is an intellectual way of showing that the problem is in the ego. It's not wrong, but just this argument will not free you from the ego. So, Krishnaji, and I'm now ending this share. So, Krishnaji suggested a different way. He said, don't resist the negative emotion. When you feel jealousy, when you feel pride, when you feel anger, don't react to it, don't suppress it, don't escape from it. Watch it. It's an opportunity to learn about yourself, to learn from where did it arise in your consciousness. There may be an external cause, but don't be satisfied with only the external cause. There is always also an inner cause which is within oneself. It is that inner cause one is wanting to learn about. And invariably, you will find that the inner cause lies in illusion, some kind of mental construct which you have not questioned, which you have accepted as true, when it is not true in the sense it's not part of nature, it's just your imagination which has created it. And because it arises out of illusion, therefore it can be ended by discerning what is true and what is false. But this means one must not be identified with that illusion, identified with that belief, with that dogma. Otherwise, you cannot discern what is true and what is false. You will be propagating your own view, not knowing that it is false or dangerous. So humility is a prerequisite for this inquiry, for the religious mind. True humility is to know that I don't know, and therefore one is inquiring to find out. But when you think you know, and you only need to convince the other person of what you know, that it creates problems. You try to convert the other person to your view, and you get angry with the other person if he thinks differently from you. There is no reason why another person should not think differently from me. He's another human being, he has his own mind, and he has the right to think what he is thinking. I have no right to dominate on him. But we take that right and we feel condemnation for that person instead of that blocks the affection, the love, the friendship. So if you put conditions on friendship, that there must be agreement in order that I'm friendly with you, then it is not real friendship. I'm reminded of a passage in Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, where he is talking about friendship, and he says, let there be no purpose in friendship save the deepening of the spirit. For love that seeks aught but the disclosure of its own mystery is not love, but a net that is cast forth, and only the unprofitable is caught. That last sentence, that only the unprofitable is caught, is the wisdom of the prophet. Because he's saying, so long as you approach life with this mind, seeking something for yourself in that relationship, you will not know what love is. Because love is generosity, kindness, affection for no reason. When you can attribute a reason why you love somebody, it's not love. So that's why Krishnamurti says, love is where the self is not. And the problem with the ego is that because you have identified with the me and the mind, which is one fragment of humanity, the mind gets hijacked towards working for the security and the profit of the me and the mind. It's no longer interested in truth. It may say so, it may delve in philosophy, but in actuality, it is not interested. It is interested only in self-promotion. The self being not only myself, but also all that I have identified myself with, my country, my religion, my family, and so on. So one has to deeply inquire into our relationship with our country, our relationship with our own body, and so on. If there is a feeling of possessiveness, a feeling of identification, a feeling of superiority, the ego is present. If it is seen only factually, where you were born, how you were brought up, what your religion was, and so on, then there is no ego in it. So it's very subtle. The problem is not with the structure of the self, because you can't erase that conditioning in your brain. But the importance you give to it, the identification from which you derive status and vanity and all that is the doing of the ego. So it comes from our own approach to our own body, our own approach to our own work, our own approach to our family, and so on. Now, Krishnaji has said everything can be done with the ego, and the same thing can be done without the ego. The house can be built egoistically, and the same house can be built non-egoistically. It's outside the field of the ego. When it is done non-egoistically, there is no conflict, no disorder coming out of it. But even if it is a generous act and so on, if it is done egoistically, the consequences of the ego will be there, presently. If something obstructs you, you will push it aside and violence will come. Because ego is ambition. Self-interest is ambition. And it is corruption. It is favoring the first person singular and wanting to dominate over all the others. So unless we can free ourselves from this kind of motivation, we don't have a religious man. You have to begin with this inquiry. To begin with, you don't have a religious mind. You have to discover that. And every time you experience a negative emotion, a conflict, a sorrow, a fear, it's an opportunity to learn about yourself, your consciousness, from where this originated within you. That is the learning of self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. Now one may think that it will take a long time to do this. Maybe a whole lifetime may go, you may not be able to free yourself of this. But time does not help you to come upon this. What is required is the intensity. That's what Krishnamurti has pointed out. So unless you are serious, unless you are intense in this quest for finding out what is true and what is false, you won't get anywhere. You will end up with opinions, ideas. And this is not a quest for new ideas to replace the old ideas. So, friends, I'll end it here. Again, Krishna is pointing out that the true religious mind is something very different from what we consider to be a religious mind or a religious man. It's not a question of just joining a church, attending some sermons, including Krishnamurti's. It has none of those things, taking part in those rituals. There may be no harm in doing that, but the harm comes from the fact that you think that all this is making you virtuous. It is not making you virtuous because the disorder in your consciousness will continue so long as the cause of the disorder continues. So it becomes like an innocent entertainment. But it is not innocent because it is associated with an illusion that one is becoming virtuous. So I'll end it there and we can have some discussion, some questions around this topic.
Thank you, Krishnaji. And we'll have a brief 5-minute break, and
Okay,
we'll continue with the question and answer session after that. We'll meet again in 5 minutes. We'll be
sure.
here, but yeah.
Last minute gap. Go bathroom.
Okay, we can move on to the Q&A. Donna, I'll put a spotlight.
Okay. Can you just check the lines?
Excuse me, please mute.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Pardon any name pronunciation. Okay, Urmi Kapti
Yes, sure.
says, I completely understand what the religious mind means, but have not the clarity about how it can survive and function in the world which we have made dangerous. Thank you, sir.
I think that is not something that is guaranteed. You have to engage with it and find out for yourself. I will give you the example of the Dalai Lama, who is supposed to be very deeply religious and perhaps enlightened. He was asked by a journalist that you are the leader of Tibet. Your country has been occupied by the Chinese. Your people are being tortured. You have run away from there and taken shelter in a neighboring country. Under these circumstances, how can you be so happy? Because it does look completely peaceful and happy. He gave a very remarkable answer. He said, see, there are only two possibilities. Either you can do something about it, then go and do it. Or nothing can be done, then that is also all right. To me, that means that he's saying life doesn't have to come the way I want it to come, that it must be pleasant for me. It can come in many ways. And what I am is my responsibility. Whether that leads to other people dominating over me or appreciating me is not my concern. So the religious mind has this, it's a very practical mind. It says nothing can be done. Under these circumstances, nothing can be done. What will you do right now with the quarrel in the Middle East? What will you do? There are deep-rooted reasons why that quarrel is taking place. You can't change that. You can try to ameliorate the conditions. You can go there and, as a United Nations Peace Force person and so on, try to patch up if you want to. But that's it. So it's not necessary that life will always be pleasant. So you don't do this in order to come upon a pleasant life. You do this because that's the right thing to do. That's how I understand Krishnamurti to be saying.
Okay, the next question from Stephen. How do you think Kay would see someone like the Dalai Lama, a Buddhist monk, someone like him, very wise and compassionate, but trained in Buddhism? Would he accept that he had a religious mind or not? A religious man or not?
Yes, it has nothing to do with the affiliation of the man. It depends on his consciousness. And Krishnaji met the Dalai Lama. He had great respect for the Dalai Lama. He is not trying to judge other people based on his views that you are identified with Buddhism, therefore I look down on you. I'm not doing that. Dalai Lama has a right to be what he is. But his consciousness has this non-violence in it. In the same way, people were surprised that he made Radha Bernier a trustee of the Krishnamurti Foundation of India, because she was the president of the Theosophical Society, and everybody thought Krishnamurti is against the Theosophical Society. He made Rinpoche a trustee of the Krishnamurti Foundation, knowing full well that Rinpoche is committed to Buddhism and to the Dalai Lama. He was not asking for agreement. He saw a certain quality in the consciousness with which he felt that it would be appropriate for him to be a trustee of the foundation. And those people also valued him and respected him. So we must not make interpretations from what we read from Krishnamurti, because that's what may not be what he meant. You must also learn from his actions. The very fact that he made Radha Bernier a trustee and Rinpoche a trustee tells me that he's saying it's the consciousness that is important, not the affiliation of a person. Affiliation to a country or to a religion or to his family, it is his job to look into it. And if he feels that that is not right, he will leave it. But he should not leave it just because Krishnamurti says so.
Okay, Kishore asked, Krishnaji mentioned in Think on These Things that the I or ego comes into being through desire, fear, greed, ambition, which follow in the wake of seeing. It is these emotions that create the I, and the I is non-existent without them. The question is, are these emotions part of the human psyche and come into being through genetics and birth?
No, they don't come genetically. The instincts come genetically. The biological instincts are already hardwired in our brains at the time of birth, like sexuality or attachment to the mother and things like that. You can read a biology or psychology book, which will tell you the instincts. Those are biological. They are the result of million years of past. It is these cultural ones which go down, 2,000 years for Christians, about 5,000 years for Hindus, and 2,500 years for the Buddhists, and so on. The cultural conditioning varies from person to person. The biological conditioning is the same for everybody. Of course, same means it's not similar, not identical. Somebody may be more sexual, another person may be less sexual. But sexuality is there in everybody. So the biological instincts are there, but it is these cultural things which we can undo if we realize that it is just an accident of birth. For me, for example, to hate the Chinese just because I was born in India and therefore I call myself Indian would be stupid. And he, for the same reason, would be equally stupid if he hates me because I am an Indian. So when you realize these things, the division ends. You look upon an individual as a person, not as a belonging to a particular group or country. And so you don't, that identification doesn't matter.
Ansuman Verma asks, is ego a function, disorder of consciousness or of the mind?
I don't understand that question. The disorder is in the consciousness, but of course it arises from the mind. Because the mind decides how to approach something. I can approach my wife with love, or I can be very possessive and identified and so on. It's entirely up to me. Depends on how you relate with things. You can be egoistic about your property, very attached to your property. Then when the share market goes up and down, your heart will go up and down with it. But if you are not attached like that, it won't go up and down with it.
Ganesh Kumar says, thank you, Brother Krishna, for the talk on the religious mind. In your chart of the role of the ego, can we take that pleasure or pain with ego contributes to addiction, habit, and boredom? Your thoughts, please, and thank you. Kind regards, Ganesh Kumar.
It has to do with our relationship with pleasure. Pleasure is a natural thing. You eat some food stuff, it gives you pleasure. You meet a friend, it gives you pleasure. You look at the sky, it gives you pleasure. It's natural. The ego comes in because it wants to grab that pleasure, hold on to it, maximize it. Greed comes in. You're not content to experience that pleasure and let it go. There is a very beautiful verse in Blake referring to this. He says, one who binds to himself a joy, does the winged life destroy. But one who kisses the joy as it flies, lives in eternity's sunrise. Meaning that if the pleasure comes, I have no objection to experiencing it. If it goes, I let it go. It's the holding on to it which is the problem, which is the addiction, the dependence on it, the attachment to it. That is the ego. The pleasure in itself is not the ego. The desire to maximize it, the desire to own it, to repeat it, is the ego. Similarly, there is a difference between sexual desire and lust. So one has to go into these are subtle things, and there's a lot of confusion unless one has paid a lot of attention, and that attention to what is brings wisdom to the mind. Wisdom being that you are in touch with reality and not living with some illusion.
Hori asks, I'm curious to delve deeper into what is self-interest. While on the call, a few people came into my room to chat with me, and I had to tell them later, for the self-interest of me focusing on this call, I can't chat with them. There's also a DJ blaring in the neighborhood right through the early morning, and I wish they would have more brains to shut up probably, in the self-interest of my peace. So how do I distinguish?
by not trying to be to practice either self-interest or the avoidance of it. Don't bring your own will into it at all. Just be a witness to what is taking place and learn from it. That's what I think I quoted last time the verse from one of the Upanishads, which talked of two birds on a tree. The first bird nibbling on the fruit, experiencing the taste or bitterness of the fruit. And the second bird is merely watching this bird, what it is doing. And it is from this watching that wisdom comes. So keep your second bird alive. The human consciousness is these two birds together in one. You can't object to the ego and decide to eliminate it. Your decision, it won't work. So don't complicate it further by bringing in your own ideas and will and so on. Just watch and observe and learn about what takes place. Real change is a byproduct of learning, not of your effort.
Bhavesh Nikra says, find
Pardon?
reading the
Sorry, I couldn't get
Bhavesh,
you. You need to
Bhavesh
repeat that. I couldn't
Nikra.
get you.
Okay. Oh, my internet is. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Bhavesh Nikra. He says, from the assigned reading, the mind is in the state of not knowing what will be, but only knowing what is not true. I do not understand. We are going into this inquiry not knowing. Now, how do we know what is not true? How do we even begin with the question of what is true and what is not true?
By watching your consciousness. If it is false, it will produce disorder in consciousness, and that is very perceptible. Anger is very perceptible. Jealousy is perceptible. Fear is perceptible. Sorrow is perceptible. When these occur, you know that somewhere in your mind there is an illusion from which these are arising. What you have to find out is what that illusion is. So for that, you need to pay a lot of attention and look at what is taking place. Then you will discover for yourself. Not find the answer in some book or in a psychology book or some guru, because that would be his answer. It won't be your perception. That's an important difference to notice, that this is not a field of knowledge. It is a field of self-knowledge, which is at the level of perception. Perception is a sensory phenomenon. It's not just an intellectual phenomenon.
Sanjay Kumar Kanodia says, Kay says that strength, which is not the result of will, which is without a cause, it cannot be utilized. But without it, nothing can exist.
Yeah, he's describing the state of love. Love has no cause. If you can give a cause to love, it's not love. If you say, I love my wife because she is beautiful, what happens when she is not beautiful? The love disappears.
And he goes on to ask, could you please elaborate what is the strength?
The strength? What? Strength of what?
That strength that comes without cause.
Oh, when you have no fear, because you are not approaching it with self-interest, then there is no fear of losing something. then therefore you are strong. It is the fear that makes you weak.
And Saimal Rao says, Kay states that revolution is synonymous with religion, and he refers to this resolution in consciousness, which in turn means complete destruction of what is known. And he says that this destruction is creation. I request Professor Kay to elaborate this.
It's not the destruction of the knowledge, but it is the destruction of the attachment to the knowledge. Actually, that knowledge doesn't produce the ego. It is just a thing that exists in your brain. If you don't identify with it, it doesn't create the ego. Just as your chair exists, but it doesn't create the ego. The ego comes in the manner in which I approach that thing or that activity. If the dominant motive behind that approach is self-interest, some kind of profit, some kind of gain, some kind of power for myself, some kind of reputation, etc., fame, then the ego is, I'm approaching it egoistically. But if it is not there, for example, right now, this talk could be egoistic with an egoistic motive if I'm interested in impressing all of you about my expertise and so on, and getting your good opinion about me. But it can also be just sharing my thoughts as a friend because I'm interested in doing that. Then there is no ego in it. So that's why I said that everything can be done with the ego motive, and the same thing can be done without the ego motive. When the ego motive is not there, it's being done with love.
Renu Aurora says, if I am in inaction, then the response can be virtuous, mostly helplessness of self, to always be good at all times. But if I have to act in response, I'm not sure this question makes complete sense to me. So just whatever you hear in it to surrounding, then it has to be logical action as much to suit myself and survival first, call it virtuous or invirtuous, religion or religious mind, how it matters.
So if it doesn't matter to you, go ahead, be egoistic and see what are the consequences. Nobody is asking you to give up the ego, and you don't have to give up either because I am saying that or Krishnamurti is saying that. It's up to you. If you feel that the ego creates great complications in your own life, in your relationships, and therefore in society, and you are interested in freeing yourself of that, then engage in this inquiry and so on. Otherwise, go on, be merry, and experience the sorrow that will come from it also. There is no guarantee what will happen. As I pointed out, the Dalai Lama is probably one of the wisest men on earth right now. This country was invaded. The Tibetans were relatively non-violent, and China just occupied them. So it's not that you do this in order for safety of your own. You do this because that's the right thing to do. See, we have been trained into purposive action. That is the problem. All our education, everything Why are you doing this? I'm doing this to pass the examination, to get a job, to have a salary, to beat the other person, etc. There's always a motive of self-gain in it. Therefore, the mind finds it very strange when we talk about doing something without a motive.
Suma asked, what is the relationship between a religious mind and organized religion?
If it's a true religious mind, it has no relationship with organized religion. Organized religions are a stepping down of what is true religion. It has been made into a palatable pill for the common man. Jesus Christ gave the Sermon on the Mount out of a lot of perception and wisdom. The church brought it down to do this and don't do this, be this and don't be this, and so on. And people have struggled to follow what the church has said, neither coming upon the wisdom of Jesus Christ and having all kinds of conflict and confession and repentance and all that. You see all that, no? So all that is not really true religion. If you accept that religion is to come upon virtue, and virtue is order in consciousness, then it has no relationship with the established authoritative religions.
Narendranath Vasudev says, did Krishnaji comment on George Gurdjieff or Acharya Rajneesh?
No, he never commented on other people. I've never known him commenting on other people.
Deepak asks, is it possible to end the ego?
That's what Krishna says. You have to find out. It's not easy, obviously, because out of whole of mankind, there are probably 1 dozen or half a dozen people who really came upon freedom. If you are interested, freedom is not an achievement. It's not like coming upon a throne. If you are interested, you do it, and there's no guarantee that you will come upon it.
Shreya Sharma says, how much free will does man then have according to Krishnamurti?
The will is the essence of the ego. Whatever I want to do, that becomes the will. For the religious mind, there is no choosing. Shall I do this or shall I do that? There is only one way to go, because it sees what is right and it wants to go in the direction of what is right. Therefore, there is no choice. Choice is when you are tempted both and you are comparing and saying, this has this benefit, that one has less benefit, but more of this relationship, etc. You are trying to maximize your self-interest. That is, so the mind with self-interest chooses, but the wise man does not choose.
Karan says, what is the state in which our seeing led to impression of truth, which acts over the psyche, acts over content, in which seeing is understanding, in which structure and vitality of past drives lose fury, and what is the way to such a state?
It is perception beyond the known. So long as the mind is functioning within the field of the known, it doesn't have the insight. That is why freedom from the known is essential. You see, even in other fields like science or art or music and so on, how does a new discovery, how is a totally new discovery made? I think it was either Mozart or Beethoven who said, I don't think out my music. I sit there and it flows through me. I tune the piano and it flows through me. Krishnamurti said the similar thing about his teaching. He said, I have not thought out this teaching. I just sit there and it comes to me. So it's something mysterious, but the human mind is capable of it. Insight is something mysterious because it's not a thought phenomenon. Thought phenomenon is a part of the known and there is no mystery about it. And in science, you can similarly think about the discovery, say, Einstein made of time and space being related to each other. It was not in his experience, it was not in his training. From where did that perception arise? He had only this question that something is wrong with the assumptions we have made because not everything is explicable. So continually you come upon this kind of thing that there is a dead end in the field of knowledge, and then you need an insight. All great discoveries, quantum mechanics was discovered like that, relativity was discovered like that. There is a very good book by Thomas Kuhn. It was his PhD thesis at MIT. It has been published. It says, there he says, the structure of scientific revolutions. And he says that from time to time there comes a man with a deep insight and he revolutionizes the entire field of physics. Then there are thousands who keep collecting data and within that paradigm and strengthening or weakening that paradigm. But the complete change of paradigm comes from an insight. So Krishnaji is demanding a similar insight into consciousness, which is much vaster thing than a question, narrow question of in science and so on, or art or music.
Diana Chardarova asks, how does passion coexist with peace? Why does Kay insist on the importance of passion?
Well, passion is intensity, energy which is not from the ego, is passion. And compassion is feeling that same for another. When you look at the sorrow of another, you feel compassion. There's no self-interest in that.
Kanchan Kogate asks, can mind operate or stay with the unknown?
It has to, because it's functioning within the known. And the known is all the time in contact with the unknown. There is a boundary between the known and the unknown. But only when you are relatively free of the known can you make a foray into the unknown and pick up something from the unknown and bring it into the field of the known. Then, of course, the scientist puts it in the language of mathematics or equations and so on. And a religious man like Krishnaji puts it in language. But he says it is very difficult to describe that because it's a mysterious phenomenon. But the human consciousness has this capacity. We have not valued it sufficiently. We have valued thought a little too much, and we have depended on thought. And thought is the child of the known.
Raju says, is there an evolution of consciousness?
You will know after 1,000,000 years. Biological evolution takes millions of years before you can notice it. When did man evolve out of monkey? So like if you wait for evolution, you wait for 1,000,000 years. But what Krishna is saying is you can be reborn tomorrow. You are the one who is blocking it. There is an interesting dialogue between Scott Forbes and Krishnamurti when Krishnamurti was giving in charge of Prof. I think 1984 or something. He says to Scott, is Scott aware that the seed of intelligence is there in him? He has nothing to do with it. It takes its own course and has its own flowering. But he can kill it. You can kill it. So the creativity in us, the intelligence of creativity is there in us, the seed of that. But we ourselves are destroying it with the ego and with our dependence, addiction to thinking. This is not my view. This is what Krishnamurti is saying.
And we have a question from the last meeting that didn't get answered from the last meeting. And the question's from Prabha Naranyan. Is ego same as attachment?
Well, ego is a more general word. It includes attachment, possessiveness, ego, comparison and competition and jealousy, all forms of self-interest are included in the ego. Attachment is one of them. Last time's questions I answered, and I have sent it to Prasad, and he is going to send the answers to everybody.
Right. This was one question that just it got asked during Saeed had asked you the question, but I don't think an answer came because he asked two questions at once, and you answered one question. But it was another. He just to save time at the end of the meeting, he asked two questions. So
Sure.
so someone wrote in asking if we could ask the question.
Of course you can.
Yeah.
Questions are the jewels. It is in looking at a question and investigating it that we grow in our wisdom. So there is absolutely no objection. I'm grateful to you for putting questions.
So we just have 5 minutes left. Did you want to have any final remarks on the session today?
Yes. Next time, I must announce which chapter we will take up. So I think we can take up the chapter on page 123, I think, which says, a mind that knows no separation. I think that's very important, that how does the mind create division? Because all these wars and these problems that we are having between Jews and Muslims and etc., or Russia and Zelensky and all that, Ukraine, they're all the product of division and how that division arises. And to free your mind of that division is part of this revolution.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
Yeah.
Prasad, did you have any final remarks?
Yes, there were some questions that from the last week that we missed asking, as well as they were not sent to you. So whatever was sent to you were already shared. So we have a few more questions remaining, which I will send to you through writing.
You can add those to the questions which may have
Sure.
remained today. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So I think it's we have just a few minutes left, and you are going to say something, Donna?
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. Thank you, everybody, for attending and making it a wonderful session.
See you next weekend.
Yeah, namaste.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
Namaste.
Professor
Thank
Krishna.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.